Français, anzadik nechi sanli la, kedikov la, ke anzadik nechi sanle, yujago wedide hidok hoto ahinde yukanle onkonfe la tiga. I'm speaking to you in the Yuchi language, the language of our community that we're revitalizing and strengthening. And I'm talking about cultural identity and well-being and its connection to the prosperity of our communities. And it means that I'm going to be addressing the issue primarily in terms of our indigenous languages, the ways that our indigenous languages are connected to the success of our communities, the prosperity of our communities. But I want to begin that discussion a little bit with the challenges. One of the challenges I will identify, we only have a few minutes for this conversation, but I wanted to start out with the comment you see on the screen. Our indigenous languages comprise, I think, the most important measure of indigenous sovereignty rights and are the most critical markers of the cultural health of our indigenous communities. So what are some of the challenges that our communities are faced with? One of the things that I want to lift up is the legacy of colonialism. I'm speaking about it here briefly, and I'm not doing it in any kind of a negative attitude or a sense of complaining, but I do think we need to understand where we are at, how we got in the position we're in, so that we can be smart about moving forward, so that we can strategize the ways that we can work together to move together toward the future that we want to see. And there are many layers to the colonial heritage. There's the ugly pattern of physical genocide, followed by a cultural genocide, perhaps most clearly expressed in the boarding school experiments, the residential school programs that took children out of their homes, away from their elders, away from their language community, away from their cultural community. And the goal of that process was to break up the continuity of those songs, of those dances, of those story traditions, to stop the language. So there are many layers to it, but one of the curious developments out of this colonial heritage that's particularly striking is the erasure of indigenous peoples. The curious claim that indigenous peoples no longer exist, somehow they become extinct, this kind of language. And I have to tell you, I first really bumped into this when I was a grad student in Princeton. And I went to the Firestone Library, one of the great libraries of the world, where knowledge, educational knowledge about all the subjects you can imagine are brought together and housed in this great library. And I went to the reference section. And of course, the reference section is that place where presumably you're getting solid, reliable information, nothing too controversial or highly interpretive, but just kind of factual, informational, reliable resources for understanding the subject that you're working on. So I went to the reference section in Firestone Library and pulled out a volume by Barbara Leach. At that time, it was pretty current, 1979, and it was a dictionary about Native American tribes. And I thought, well, I wonder what they have about my people, my community, the Yuchi Nation. So I turned to the section under the Y's, Y-U-C-H-I, and here was the reading about the Yuchi Nation. Very first sentence, Yuchi, an extinct hunting and gathering society. That was the very first thing, the very first message about Yuchi people was that we were extinct. I don't know exactly how to communicate to you what it's like to be sitting in one of the great libraries of the world and reading that your people are extinct. And actually, a few months later, amazingly, surprisingly, unexpectedly, I was at a book sale, a community book sale there in Princeton. And they had some books that had been cut from the shelves, the old books in the library at Firestone. And here was this old volume from the 1880s, 100 years before. And this was Lossing's New History, at that time, New History in the 1880s, Lossing's New History of the United States. And I picked it up. I thought, well, let me see, what people were writing 100 years ago. And here was also a chapter about the Yuchi people. And there was also, again, a direct and explicit statement that the Yuchis are in fact, it said, they are in fact an extinct nation and their language is almost forgotten. How do you respond to, now we're looking at not only a recent publication at that time, but also 100 years previously. Here's this published record saying that your people don't even exist. They are extinct. So, of course, I was a graduate student at the time, and so I began to check on some of these records, and it became something of a research interest to try to track this strange business of repeatedly saying that indigenous people are somehow extinct. And I found it going clear back to 1821 in government reports from Pannier. I found it in 1848 writings. I found it in even in more recent publications, including strikingly a children's volume by Carl Vollmann, an encyclopedia of Native American tribes. And in that volume, it said that the Yuchi people were extinct. And this was a volume that came out in the 1990s. Likewise, there was a volume that was entitled Native American Costume by Patrick that came out, I believe, in 1996. And it said that the Yuchi disappeared from the records in the 19th century. Apparently, we had disappeared 100 years ago, and this was the level of their remark. So what I was struck with, and I won't take time to unpack all of it, but just quickly to say, this is a trope, this is a colonial trope that has an important function in the colonial process of declaring an indigenous people extinct. Somehow, in fact, they are an extinct nation, as the quote was from the 1880s. The function of it, it seems to me, is to provide kind of a salve, to provide kind of an excuse to kind of justify the ugly colonial processes that were going on in the dispossession of indigenous peoples and the taking over of their properties, their lands, their resources. So that the effect of this, I think, is pretty significant on our young people. So if you think about the fact that our children, our Yuchi children or other indigenous nations, can go to the reference library at their school, particularly, for example, the Waldman reference resource about Native American tribes. It was designed for youth. I don't know the exact age range, but presumably junior high, maybe later grade school years, grades, 4 through middle school. And if they go to the library, they see that reference saying that they are in fact an extinct nation. What is the impact on our youth when they see that they are being identified somehow as extinct? And that's part of the challenge that we have for our young people to try to address for them, to try to support them. What do you say to young people who are going to the library and reading that they no longer exist? So our community developed several responses to this. We had an elder, a wonderful elder, William Cowie, who saw youth singing in different languages, "We shall overcome." So he really wanted our Yuchi children to be able to sing, "Behe Onal," "We shall overcome." Another one of our elders, Mose Cowie, talked about Son Keneno, Yuchi Haneno, that we Yuchi people, we are still here. And this was something that he used in a kind of a spiritual way. So when he gave his prayers, he always talked about Yuchi Haneno, Son Keneno, we Yuchi people, we are still here. And this was his way of addressing it. And it was an important message for our young people. We doubled down. We reinvigorated our efforts to revitalize our language with the youth and the community. We covered our kids with T-shirts with Yuchi language all over it. We gave them hats with Yuchi language. Not to say that those words, those shirts with our language in themselves are somehow magical to protect our kids. But we wanted our youth to feel a pride in their language, in their community, in their heritage, and to be able to stand up against some of this pressure, some of this broad social injunction that was somehow diminishing them, that was affecting their self-understanding, their sense of self-worth, because this message was out there that you're not extinct. The message seemed to be maybe that you're not welcome here, you're not wanted here, or as our Yuchi artist Richard Ray Whitman, Shajwani, talks about it, many of our people becoming homeless in our own homeland. How do we address that? And our challenge was to really, not the shirts themselves were somehow magical in overcoming these challenges, but the connection to the elders really grounds our youth in their traditions, in their beliefs. The connection through the languages allows our young people to connect spiritually through prayers. The connection through the language brings people to our ceremonial ways, our story traditions, our traditional way of life in a very strong way that is difficult to overstate. And there is nothing that can that I've been able to understand that can connect our young people to their identity, to their traditions in as powerful of a way. This is our elder, Mose Cowie, Yujiane no son kene no. We Yuchi people, we are still here. I think this is a message for our indigenous communities around the globe. I know I have been to indigenous meetings in past years in Brazil, and the indigenous community there was shocked to see indigenous people from the United States. You know, they get access to these old Hollywood movies. They thought John Wayne had wiped us all out. They literally couldn't understand that we were still here. So this is our message to our young people. Yujihane no son kene no. Or if we want to speak in terms of our broader indigenous community, Gochafla nena son kene no. We indigenous people, we are still here. And this last screen I put up just to say this is about inclusivity. It's about connecting our different indigenous worlds, supporting one another and reinforcing one another as we work to overcome many of these challenges that we're dealing with. And this is the message, through our indigenous languages, we're able to carry it forward, make ourselves stronger, reinforce our connection to our identity, and improve our sense of well-being. And this is a key element in the success of our youth going into the future. Ale kanata. Go ahead and weanzio shile no. Blessings for all of you. I appreciate having the opportunity to give you a few quick remarks. Kedata leha. Go ahead and weanzio shile no.